Yeah. So
Hello.
how are we gonna do it?
Let's do it. It's rolling.
Oh, it's oh, I just see that now. Okay. All right.
And please excuse the noise that you're gonna hear in the background because, of course, like any good recording should have, my dog will start barking and then contractor working on my deck. So you're gonna hear some noise and I'm gonna mute myself. So Michael, so good to check in with you, and then especially as our newest kind of graduate of our summer program. Hey,
Ooh,
welcome.
oh,
And
I'm a
then
graduate. That's
a
cool.
star. Nice hat.
Uh,
So, a few questions for you, Michael.
mhm.
What is it that you care about in your life that you are drawn to the solution focused? It's a big question.
It is a big question. I have to take my hat off for this one.
Oh, for that, okay.
It's such a big question. Yeah, what's drawn me to it really in terms of my own life is it just fits in really, really well with my current worldview. So, something that I really took away from it. There's a whole bunch of things. The quadrants themselves, and on a personal level, the realization that most of us live in 3 and 4 was huge for me. It was an indicator, and I know there's some evolutionary biology in there, but I think that at this stage in human development, it's something that I think we can get away from. So, my personal belief that to some degree we choose where we spend time was really made obvious when you put the quadrants up the first time, and I went, oh my God, we spend most of our lives living below this line. And so that had a huge impact on me, because it really brought a very stark reality to the fact that most people spend their lives either living in fear of the future or in fear of the past. So that was massive for me. Yeah, that was a big one.
And Michael, also one of the things that we say about what we do at the center is, I really love introducing all of us as practical philosophers. Yes. And then when I met you, and then throughout the course, that's what I actually sensed from you too, that you are not just about practices, but also about the philosophy of it. So, that's what I sense from you. And I think the practical part of it, how have you used some of the things that you actually gained from the courses? And what kind of positive differences have you noticed so far?
Well, practical uses, it's been mostly around paying attention to the language that I use. So one thing that was made very clear for me through the training was the power that a single word can have. And the example that you use, is suppose and oppose. For me, and but is a big one as well. So I would say that in a practical sense, without being effortful about it, I'm way more, there's a fly in here, my apologies. I'm way more tuned in to how I'm presenting myself via my language. And it's been neat because I've been able to sort of self-censure, but without any effort. So my language in general has turned, is a bit of a cliche, it has become much more positive. So when I'm sharing with my family or just communicating with anyone, I'm just much more aware of representing what I'm feeling verbally accurately. Is that, I mean, there's a lot.
I know, because you share some of your stories, and I'm just so blown away whenever we talk about it. And I think, Michael, in a way, I mean, I meet a lot of people when I go around and do some trainings and sharing these things. And it's so exciting to meet somebody who is as excited and dedicated to share this with other people. So when I mean, you say you're pretty new to this, but then what is it about this that get you so excited? What is it about this that you find so attractive that you are just sharing?
Yeah.
I mean, you've just organized a webinar and all these things, and you've been actually sharing with other people from day one, right?
Yeah. A lot of that, I think, sort of coming back to my worldview, I think that as a society, perhaps as a global culture, we are inundated with problem solving and problem diagnoses. And I think if you look at the news, if you look at social media in particular, we glorify and glamorize difficulties and problems. And I think as a modality, this just so clearly shifts the focus away from the problem. So something that struck me, which was actually in this little book, which I will do a little shout out. If you haven't read this, do so. Something that Steve DeSager says is problem talk creates problems and solution talk creates solutions. And in a nutshell, Haseun, that is what draws me so strongly to this. Most of what I see around me is problem talk. And I think that if we're really going to make a difference on a global scale, if we're really going to increase our global level of consciousness, then we have to start looking away from problems. That's it in a nutshell for me. That's what makes me kind of come alive when I think about this. It's simply that the problem doesn't matter. And just let me add, I forget now who did the coaching demo, but in one of the trainings, this really struck me that there was an entire coaching conversation, and I mean, it wasn't just this one occurrence, but this one stuck out, that there was no mention of the problem, there was no diagnosis, there was nothing. The person wanted clarity, and then the conversation went from there. It didn't matter even what they wanted clarity about. There was absolutely no need to do any kind of reflection on the problem. And for me, this might sound a little altruistic, but if we individually slowly started to spread that, then it's going to become something that I believe is going to have a positive effect on us or has the potential to have a globally positive influence on us.
I love how you actually, sorry for that noise. It sounds like I'm hungry, but they're actually drilling outside. That's not my stomach, okay? When you talk about global awareness and consciousness, and I think it's just such a fascinating perspective that you have, or stance that you take.
Yeah.
And I remember one of our conversations that, by the way, that sounded like, a matrix, like scene where you talk about the global, consciousness. Is kind of cool. And I remember one of the conversations that we had in class, and I think Dwayne was also participating in this particular conversation about, is this kind of like are we talking about it as a stance? Like it's coaching or a solution-focused approach. It's more like a stance that we can use when we are facing different situations, or is it more like a skill that we actually bring in and kind of... So that was a very interesting conversation. I think you actually started. So I'm throwing it back at you. So, what is your discovery so far about, is this something, is that stance, is that skill? And yeah, I just wanted to ask you that question.
Yeah, stance and skill. It's funny. I was going through my notes yesterday, and we touched on stance and skill on the last day of our training. So when I think about a stance, I go towards martial arts. And what I see there is a stance let me qualify this by saying this is what I think right now, and I reserve the right to change that at any time. The stance, as I see it, that we take when we're doing solution focused or when we take on in martial arts is one of passive readiness. It is a position that we adopt that enables us to react to information as it comes into us. So, if I'm in a narrow corridor and I'm faced with an opponent in martial arts, my starting position is going to be quite different than if I'm in an open room. Well, what that does is it puts me in the best position to deal with or to make sense of whatever's coming at me. So for me, the solution-focused stance is one that, among other things, holds the person that we're talking to capable. Now, it doesn't mean that they have their own solution yet, but they have the capability for that solution to come to fruition. And then it's our job as coaches to help that. So that's sort of the stance part for me. And I think it's important that, at least for me, when I talk about stance, it's something that's transitory. So it's only shifting and adopting. So there's a basic stance that is, say, I forget the Japanese words now, it's been a while, but it might be zanshin, where you're in a state of preparedness, but there's no anticipation of where the next thing is going to lead you. So it allows you to be very open. And then in that sense, very, I'm not sure if reactive is the right word. So in a solution-focused conversation, my initial stance might be holding the person capable. And then the dialogue begins, and then my next stance becomes about their curiosity. And then my next stance, so it's this constant, it's not a fixed point, but it's a stance that changes based on the direction that the client takes the conversation. And then to me, that in itself is a skill. The ability to sort of self-center as the conversation takes place is, to me, where there's a convergence between stance and skill. Now, there's obviously skill within the methodology, but it seems to me the sense that I'm getting is that ultimately what we're trying to do is throw the methodology out, right? We learn it, and then we're able to adapt it as we need. And for me, again, that's stance to stance to stance. So my position changes depending on what I'm faced with. And I can see you nodding, but I'm hoping this is coming across as sensible.
Michael, I was just looking for a pen and paper to write, but I realized this is being recorded. Michael, I just love how you are making such a meaningful metaphor, actually. Kind of that passive readiness, and then in a way without anticipation. So you're ready to respond, ready to kind of, and then it will be different each time, each and every single time, depending on where you are, with whom you are with, and then also it kind of having that sort of sense that being nimble in itself is actually a skill. Stance actually is a skill. I mean, I just love that, Michael. Boy. I'm glad that you were having this call.
Yeah, well, you're welcome.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure, Haseun. It's always wonderful to chat with you. What do you think about stance and skill?
Now that you talked about it, I have no opinion at all. I'm going to just go with whatever you say. And I think in a way, for me, it's somehow, as you talk about it too, for me, meeting solution focus was somewhat familiar already because of my own worldview. At the same time, meeting solution focused and getting to know the practice was like, it was within a week that I felt like I just passed the threshold. I cannot go back.
Right.
At the same time, it took me nearly like first 10 years to actually get it. And I'm still getting it. So I think I love how you're describing it as that there's a convergence of stance and skill. And I think we kind of come in and out of it constantly as we grow as well. So yeah, that's how I see it. Thank you so much, Michael. This was really, this was fun.
Oh, my pleasure, Haseun.
Oh, and for those of the newsletter people who might be watching this and wondering, who is he? What does he do? Could you actually I forgot to ask you. And say a few things about you that might be, that you want people to actually learn about who you are.
Oh gosh, learn about who I am. Well, I suppose the truth is I'm an aspiring coach of the solution-focused school. My background, I owned a CrossFit gym. So I've been in the physical world, so the performance, strength, and weight loss world for 13 years formally, taught martial arts for a bunch of years as well. So my coaching background, I suppose that counts as a coaching background, is on the physical side. And I guess if we have time, I'll throw this in, and what brought me over to the solution focus, to the mental coaching aspect, was looking at all of the clients, and it's been thousands of clients over 13 years now. And there was a realization about 3 years ago where I realized that the transformational changes that were occurring had nothing to do with what I was teaching people physically, and everything to do with what they came to on their own mentally, right? So now that was in conjunction, in conversation. So it was a co-creation, but it was the realization that despite knowing how to make people stronger or leaner or faster, ultimately the decision to do any of those things has to come from the individual. And at that point, I lost interest in being a teacher or an expert. And it struck me that to really create meaningful change, the relationship had to change for me. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, that's kind of who I am and where I'm at now.
That's so cool. I love how you just respond to these questions as they come to you. And, lastly, Michael, that one thing that I'm going to actually say publicly is that you are one of those people that I have seen who are just so dedicated to see the progress. So even when you actually have the most difficult sessions that come at you, you're the one who will come out and say, okay, that didn't work. Now what do I do next? I love that about you. And I think that's what keeps me actually coming back to you and ask you questions. And I just love working with people who are so passionate. And with that humility, I really appreciate working with you. I'm learning a lot from actually working with you. So thank you.
I'm blushing. Thank you, Haseun. Well, the truth is, hearing that from you means an awful lot to me.
Mm.
We got to stop or I'm going to start crying.
Anyway, I'm so happy that we got to have this conversation, because this was one of my main questions, actually leaving the brief stance and skill. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people will actually appreciate your perspective on it. So thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Awesome.
Oh, come on, for the ending, can you actually put back on your hat?
Yeah. You don't want this is the serious thing we're doing here, right? There we go. An official hat from Morocco.
Thank you so much again, Michael.
Thanks, Haseun. We'll talk soon.